Hey, welcome back to the Food Forest. Today we've got a couple tips that I've thought of in the last couple days about things that I kind of don't recommend you necessarily focus on anymore when you're starting a food forest and gardens, but specifically when you're moving towards perennials like a food forest. So let's just get right into it, and then I'll discuss a little bit more about the depth of what I mean when I'm saying these two tips to you. Okay, so the two tips, I'm just going to say them up front so you don't have to sit through a 20-minute video if you don't want to. The two tips are going to be, first off, careful how much you take on, and specifically the way that you take it on, because it's work every single year. And, most of us are doing this because it's a hobby, we're interested in it, and we're passionate about, growing healthy food for our family, doing it in a way that's environmentally responsible and even beneficial. Now, the second one is a little bit more broad, but I can kind of generalize it as don't think that you have to do things, in a specific way that, humans like to do it. So, for example, don't think that you have to necessarily have a food forest that is a wood chip mulch base, and that has to be something that you kind of keep going on and on. It's actually something you transition out of ideally. It's something that you do when you start, but you're going to transition out of it eventually, and it's mostly for work and because it's not really needed. So let me talk about that one first a little bit because it'll tie into the first one. Okay, so here's the first food forest strips that I ever set up. And when I did this, I sheet mulched. It was about half as wide as this. I then added on a whole extra section here. I sheet mulched both sides, and over the last 7 years, I've kept them wood chipped. So I add new wood chips probably about every 2 years, top them up with about, I would say about another 3 inches or so of wood chips. And I actually find now that it's really not needed. Okay, we're gonna head down to the bottom to that old man walking trail, and I'll explain what I'm talking about down there. Okay, so this old man walking trail, I have a kind of like a cedar forest in here, and I cut a trail down through there. We've got poison ivy here, so we're doing a tarp kind of sheet blocking to kill it, smother it out. And then this old man walking trail goes all the way down there. It cuts all the way back behind. The pawpaws are in this area. It comes up through here, walks down around, comes back around, all the way up through here. And all the way through, it's actually walking through food forest strips as it winds back down and goes into the back area. This whole entire area I sheet mulched with leaves and thought I'm going to have to do a sheet mulch reset and add in wood chips every single year. And actually, I find it's completely unnecessary. The reason why I sheet mulch this is because I wanted to smother and kill the grasses so that I could get trees established, mostly so that the grasses wouldn't kill the trees. But I've learned a little bit more about this and the value of grass specifically. In the permaculture space, we really hate grass. We talk about grass and how do you get rid of grass, how do you get grass out of a garden. And a lot of it comes down from the fact that we start gardening, and in general, you don't really want grass around carrots because it'll smother it. A lot of people in orchards don't necessarily want grass around their apple trees, for example, but it's more because of the way that they plant the apple trees. They plant apple trees at 20-foot centers. There's nothing else in between the apple trees, and then you've got the grasses that will grow up and kind of starve nutrients out of the apple trees because grass is a heavy feeder. But in an environment like this, as long as you're planting diversity, you're putting in herbs and flowers, ground covers, nitrogen fixers, pollinator attractors, everything, deep tap-rooted nutrient accumulators, everything that should go into a permaculture guild. And you can see my video on permaculture guilds where I talk about building guilds using the functions of plants, not necessarily the individual plants. Definitely check that one out if you haven't yet. It'll help you understand what I'm talking about here. But when you create a polyculture and you've got a bunch of different plants that have symbioses that work together in order to create the whole system stronger, grasses is actually a very valuable part of that functional habitat. What I talked about in the beginning days, 5, 7 years ago, I talked about this guild where I would plant clover for the rabbits. And it was because when I planted, my trees and tomatoes growing in and around the trees and strawberries, that the rabbits were coming in and eating them. We're in a pretty wild area down here, and rabbits just come in, deer come in, and they just browse whatever. So I was trying to figure out solutions for the rabbits, and I noticed that they would eat clover, so I planted a bunch of clover. And I thought I was the smartest guy out there. I created this system that was like rabbit proof. But over the years, I've actually found there's one plant that rabbits probably like a little more than clover, and that's grass. So if you are removing the grass out of your food forest systems, then you're actually making everything more prone to rabbit damage. Everything's going to be more susceptible to loss through rabbits if you don't have grass. For that reason, we actually have been leaving the grass up and longer in and around this whole Old Man Walking Trail. And what I found is we have no rabbit damage down here at all. We've got lots of rabbit scat everywhere. And it's because the rabbits are eating the grass. And when I come down here and I see the rabbits down here, they're always eating grass. Plus, it's a lot of work to constantly bring in wood chips. And if you think about what happens in a forest in terms of the natural nutrient cycling, yes, trees do fall down. And yes, over millennia, the fallen trees will create, fungal networks in the ground. That fungal network will tie all the roots of all the trees together, balance out nutrient loads, and turn, nitrates into nitrites, and all of this stuff that we've talked about in soil microbiology videos. But the important part is where most of the recycling comes in a forest is actually through leaf litter. Now here's kind of an experiment that I've been running the last couple of years, which is called Wildflower Hill. And we basically sprinkled wildflower seeds all over this hill at the bottom of the pond and just let it go wild. I also planted some trees in here, and the wildflowers completely swallowed the trees, and I don't think any of the trees are left alive anymore. And you can imagine when this hill that's dormant now, really picks up in the spring, there's no light getting to anything smaller. A lot of the wildflowers that are really beneficial to nature that I let grow here, they get up over the trees and they shade them out, and the trees are just slower growers. Some will live over time. I mean, that is the natural succession of how a forest grows. Some will actually pop up through there, but it'll tend to be the nitrogen fixing pioneer plants that'll be able to shoot up over this stuff, not necessarily an old growth tree like, say, the oaks and maples that I put in here. So that's to say, when you have, a starting food forest strip like this down here, we don't really necessarily need to keep coming in and putting wood chips down. And even if you wanted to, how are you mechanically going to get in there and put the wood chips into all of this? It's very difficult. It's impractical. It's not going to really work well. You're going to smother and kill and snap little baby trees that you've got there. But most importantly, it's really not needed. So I do think that the proper strategy is year one, you do a nice good sheet mulch to reset while you plant baby trees. If you're planting like a 4-year-old tree, you can pretty much skip this step. You can go with a smaller sheet mulch. But on year 2 or 3, depending on how fast your mulch breaks down, like if you're using leaves, then probably on year 2, you'll be ready to seed into it. If you don't, nature will seed in, whatever is rampant in your area, which is mostly going to be noxious invasive weeds. If you're using wood chips, you're probably looking at year 2 or year 3. But once you start breaking down that really thick mulch layer that nothing can grow in, and that starts breaking down, making good soil underneath it, and you can actually start germinating some seeds in there, I would definitely recommend, pull back some of the mulch, sprinkle in like a wildflower mix, a nitrogen fixing mix, like a soil building mix, like, cowpea, vetch, clover, that kind of thing. Sow that in, get an understory growing of green living plants. And then don't worry about bringing in wood chips all the time. Wood chips are really just like a starter strategy. It's not like an ongoing maintenance strategy, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary, but even up here where we have abundant wood chips, I don't necessarily think I need that many more wood chips, to be honest. Unless, I noticed that an area of my guild was transitioning in a way that I didn't like. For example, like if Creeping Charlie was just taking over too much, then I could do a sheet mulch reset on that, and then I could sow in things like, wild geraniums, wood asters, whatever kind of perennial wildflowers that I want to grow in there to act as a, beneficial complement to the guild that I'm growing at the time. But definitely don't underestimate the value of grasses, even in a forest setup, right at the fringe of your setup. That's where grasses exist in nature. There's a lot of animals that have actually evolved to eat in that area, and if you take that away from them, they're just going to push further in, and they're going to start nibbling on your trees. They're going to start, doing more damage to the plants that you actually care about. I had previously talked about sprinkling clover everywhere and it being like, rabbit crack. They love it. They eat it all. But, what's better than clover, or, at least just as good, probably better, and it's grass. So thanks for watching. Those tips kind of merged into one big mess of a video, but I think I'm just going to leave it there. I think the discussion was good. So, sometimes we don't necessarily have to do all the work that we think to make things look organized and mulched and clean. We don't necessarily have to have these winding paths going through mulched and non-mulched areas to make it look nice. We can do it if we want, but just understand you're really doing it for the aesthetics. You're not really doing it for the function. Don't be afraid of grass. Maybe in the first year, but don't be afraid of it long term. It's actually fairly valuable. Once your trees can get up above it, there's grass, all over the place in nature. And it actually acts as deflection for a lot of the pests that would damage your trees. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.